The wedding drums stopped the exact second Abena's wheelchair rolled backward and nearly tipped over the marble steps. Laughter burst across the grand hall. "Even fate rejects her," someone sneered. Abena gripped the armrests, her face burning as jeweled guests stared like vultures. Her father shoved the chair forward and hissed, "Smile. You should be grateful any man agreed to take you." Then the chapel doors opened. A tall man in dusty work boots walked through the gold-lit aisle, calm as thunder. Kojo Mensah. The poor mechanic, no one invited, strode to the altar, looked at the trembling bride and said 5 words that froze every heartbeat. "I will marry her now." But Abena's tears were not from shame. They were from something no one in that room could imagine. Before we continue, what would you do if you discovered the only person who showed you kindness knew nothing about your true power? Tell me your country and local time in the comments. And if you love emotional stories full of twists and justice, subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. The wedding guests did not clap when the vows ended. They watched. That was worse. Silence hung over the chapel like smoke, while Abena sat rigid in her wheelchair, her fingers locked so tightly around the embroidered blanket on her lap that the fabric wrinkled beneath her nails. The minister had already spoken the final blessing. The gold candles still trembled in their glass holders. The flower girls stood frozen near the aisle. Yet no one moved with the warmth that usually followed a marriage. Because this was not a wedding born from love. It was a transaction dressed in white. Kojo Mensah stood beside her in a plain charcoal suit that had clearly been borrowed for the day. The sleeves were slightly short. His shoes had been polished so carefully that the old leather shone despite the cracks near the toes. He looked like a man who had walked into the wrong room by mistake, except for his face. His face was steady. Too steady. He did not lower his eyes before the wealthy guests. He did not smile for approval. He did not shrink. That unsettled them. Abena noticed it immediately. Most men who had come near her during the last 2 years wore one of 3 expressions: pity, greed, or disgust. Kojo wore none of them. He had looked at her only once during the ceremony, and that single glance had held something far more dangerous. Respect. It was so unfamiliar that she did not know what to do with it. "Move," her mother muttered sharply behind the chair. The photographer was signaling for the couple to begin walking down the aisle. Abena braced herself for the awkward spectacle. Normally 2 servants handled her chair in public so her family could pretend the burden was invisible. She expected someone to rush forward now. No one did. The room waited to see what the poor mechanic would do. Kojo stepped behind the chair without a word. His hands closed around the handles carefully, not like a man grabbing luggage, but like someone asking permission without speaking. Then he pushed her forward at a slow, controlled pace. The long aisle stretched before them, lined with white roses and expensive faces. Whispers began at once. "So he really intends to play husband. He looks like he came from the workshop. Maybe he's cleverer than he looks. A crippled bride from the Badu family is still worth money." Abena kept her chin lifted, but each sentence struck like a slap. She had trained herself not to react. Months ago she would have broken. Now she simply let the humiliation pass over her like cold rain. Yet beside her, Kojo's hands did not tighten. That surprised her more than the insults. He did not push faster in embarrassment. He did not angle the chair to hide her from view. He walked at the same calm pace all the way through the aisle, past rows of jeweled wrists and tailored suits, as if he were escorting a queen, not a scandal. By the time they reached the chapel doors, Abena's breathing had changed. It was still shallow, but no longer from shame alone. Outside, the afternoon sun blazed over the stone courtyard of the Badu estate. Luxury cars gleamed along the circular drive. A fountain splashed in the center, absurdly bright and cheerful against the bitterness in the air. Staff members hurried around carrying trays of champagne and crystal glasses, pretending not to listen. Kojo stopped the wheelchair in the shade of a jacaranda tree. For the first time since the ceremony began, they were briefly alone. Abena stared ahead. "You can drop the act now." Kojo's voice came from behind her, low and even. "What act?" "The noble husband." Her tone was cool enough to cut. "You've done what my family paid you to do. You don't need to pretend we are equals." A pause followed. Not offended, not defensive. When he spoke again, his voice had lost even the smallest trace of ceremony. "I never pretend with people who are already hurting." The answer unsettled her so sharply that she turned her head. He was looking at the courtyard, not at her, as if he had not said anything remarkable. Up close, she saw the sun-darkened lines near his eyes, the faint scar along his jaw, the weariness of someone who had spent too many years carrying too much weight without complaint. "You speak like a man who knows pain," she said before she could stop herself. He gave the smallest shrug. "Most people do. They just hide it differently." Before Abena could respond, the sharp click of leather shoes struck the stone behind them. Her father. Kwame Badu emerged from the chapel with the expression he used in boardrooms when he was about to buy silence. Tall, impeccably dressed, silver at the temples, he carried wealth like a weapon. His smile appeared only when others were watching. Now that they were alone, his face dropped into its natural shape, contempt. "Kojo." He spoke the name as if it were unpleasant in his mouth. A moment. Kojo stepped away from the chair but did not bow his head. Kwame glanced at Abena. "You. Wait here." Abena said nothing. She had learned years ago that resistance in public only fed his cruelty. But inwardly every nerve sharpened. She knew that tone. It was the tone her father used before turning people into tools. Kwame led Kojo a short distance toward the fountain, far enough to make the conversation seem private, not far enough to hide it completely. Abena lowered her gaze, making herself appear passive. Then she listened. Her father drew a thick envelope from inside his jacket. "Take this," he said. "You did well today. Better than expected." Kojo did not reach for it. Kwame continued, impatient already. "There will be more if you behave sensibly. Keep her quiet. Keep her cooperative. Sign what needs to be signed when the time comes. In return, you will never have to repair another engine in your life." Abena's pulse slowed. There it was. The real wedding gift. Not gratitude. Not acceptance. Control. Kwame was not marrying her off. He was installing a handler. For one cold second, she hated herself for feeling disappointed. Of course Kojo would take it. Every man before him had wanted something. Money only changed the speed of their betrayal. Kwame extended the envelope farther. "This is more cash than you've seen at one time in your life." Kojo looked at it, then at Kwame, then back at the envelope. When he spoke, his voice carried just enough to reach Abena under the jacaranda tree. "If I wanted payment for standing beside your daughter, I would be cheaper than you deserve." Kwame's hand froze. Even the fountain seemed quieter. Kojo took one slow step back from the envelope. "I agreed to marry her, not to sell her." The courtyard tilted inside Abena's mind. Her father's expression darkened instantly. "Be careful. Men like you confuse pride with dignity, and men like you," Kojo replied, "confuse money with power." Kwame's nostrils flared. For a moment, Abena thought he might strike him. Instead, he shoved the envelope back into his jacket with rigid fury. "You will regret testing me." Kojo did not answer. Kwame turned on his heel and strode away toward the reception hall, already rearranging his face for society. Abena remained motionless. Not because she had to, because she was stunned. Kojo returned to the wheelchair, but he did not mention what had happened. He simply adjusted the shawl that had slipped from her shoulder, his movements practical and unshowy. "You heard?" he asked quietly. "Yes. That may make things harder for you." Abena let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, though nothing about this day was funny. "You think today can still become harder?" His mouth shifted slightly. Not a smile, just the shadow of one. "I try not to challenge fate." For the first time, something inside her chest loosened. It was tiny, dangerously tiny, but real. Servants began opening the tall glass doors to the reception hall. Music drifted out, polished, expensive, empty. Beyond those doors waited more humiliation, more whispers, more smiling enemies in silk and diamonds. Abena knew the rules of that world. She had survived it by learning not to hope. Hope made people careless. Hope made them bleed. And yet, as Kojo placed his hands once more on the wheelchair and gently turned her toward the hall, Abena felt the first unfamiliar crack in the walls around her heart. Not trust. Not yet. But curiosity. Who was this man who refused money he desperately needed? Who was this stranger who treated her like a person when everyone else treated her like a burden, a bargaining chip, or a stain? And most dangerous of all, what would happen if he remained this kind when no one was watching? She straightened him the chair as they crossed the threshold into the glittering reception hall. The crowd turned toward them again. This time Abena did not lower her eyes, because for the first time in years she was no longer entering the room alone. The reception hall glittered like a palace built for lies. Crystal chandeliers poured golden light over polished marble floors. Musicians in white uniforms played soft strings near the staircase. Tables overflowed with imported fruit, silver trays, and desserts so delicate they looked too expensive to touch. Everywhere Abena turned there were smiles sharpened into weapons. And yet the cruelest thing in the room was not the wealth. It was how naturally everyone wore their masks. Kojo pushed her wheelchair through the center aisle toward the head table reserved for the Badu family. Heads leaned together. Lips moved. Eyes dragged across him, then settled on her with the old mixture of pity and entertainment. Abena had seen it since the accident years ago. People did not know how to look at suffering, so they turned it into spectacle. "Sit them there," her mother Akosua Badu ordered, pointing to a small side table near the service doors. Not the bridal table, not beside the family, near the kitchen entrance. Abena's jaw tightened. Even after forcing the marriage, her parents still wanted to display her as lesser. Kojo's hands stilled on the wheelchair handles. He looked at Akosua calmly. "The bride sits with her husband." Akosua laughed once, sharp and ugly. "And where do you think husbands of your class belong?" Several guests chuckled. Kojo did not. He glanced toward the long central table where empty seats remained beside the family crest centerpiece. Then he wheeled Abena straight past Akosua. The room fell into startled silence. He stopped beside two vacant chairs at the main table, locked the wheels gently, then pulled out one seat for himself and one for Abena's chair position, as if this arrangement had always been obvious. A cousin gasped. Someone dropped a fork. Kwame Badu rose halfway from his chair. "Do you understand where you are?" Kojo met his stare. "At my wedding." Abena almost looked at him. Almost. Instead, she kept her face neutral, though heat moved through her chest in a way she did not welcome. Defiance was dangerous. Defiance invited retaliation. But for one brief second, her father had no answer. That alone was worth witnessing. The meal began under tension thick as smoke. Servants placed courses before the guests in practiced silence. Lobster tails, roasted lamb, saffron, rice, glossy sauces arranged like paintings. Before Abena, they placed a bowl of plain mashed vegetables and broth. The special tray. The humiliating tray they always gave her in public so people would assume she could not manage normal food. Kojo noticed immediately. He lifted the silver lid from his own plate, perfect steak vegetables, fresh bread, and switched it with hers before anyone could stop him. Akosua snapped. That meal was prepared for her condition. Kojo cut into the steak and set the knife down. Then whoever prepared it has never met her. The room went still again. Abena stared at the food now before her. No one had challenged the tray before. No one. Not doctors, not relatives, not even herself. Because after enough years of humiliation, people sometimes accepted cages simply because they were familiar. Slowly, Abena picked up her fork. She cut the steak herself and ate. A murmur moved around the table like wind through dry grass. Mini victory. Tiny. Yet it shook the room. Kwame's face hardened with every passing second. Abena understood why. Control depended on ritual. Break enough rituals and people started asking questions. When dessert arrived, a young banker named Yor, one of her father's allies, leaned toward Kojo with fake friendliness. "So, my friend, how much did they promise you?" Laughter flickered around the table. Kojo dabbed his mouth with a napkin. "Less than you charge to laugh at jokes you don't understand." A few guests choked on their drinks. Yor flushed dark red. Kwame slammed his palm lightly on the table. Enough. But the damage was done. For the first time all evening, the laughter had turned the wrong direction. Abena lowered her eyes to hide the dangerous curve threatening her lips. After the meal, the guests drifted toward the ballroom terrace for dancing and speeches. Music swelled. Cameras flashed. Servants cleared plates with the speed of people trained never to be noticed. Kojo leaned slightly toward her. "Do you want air?" The question stunned her. Not, "We are going outside," not, "You need air," not an instruction. A question. "Yes," she said quietly. He wheeled her through side corridors lined with family portraits. Men in uniforms bowed as they passed. Women in silk dresses whispered into jeweled hands. Abena ignored them all. They reached a rear veranda overlooking the city. Night had fully fallen. Thousands of lights glowed below like stars spilled onto the earth. The noise from the ballroom faded behind thick glass doors. For the first time that day, silence felt clean. Kojo stood beside the railing, hands in pockets. "You could have taken the money," Abena said. "Yes, most would." "Yes, but you didn't." He looked out over the city. "My mother used to say, money given to buy your silence becomes the most expensive money you ever touch." Abena studied him. "Your mother sounds wise." "She was stubborn," he said. "Wisdom came later." Something warm and human passed briefly between them. Then footsteps approached. Esimensa, Kojo's younger sister, rushed onto the veranda, wearing a simple blue dress that had clearly been altered to fit twice before. She stopped when she saw Abena, then straightened nervously. "Brother, I'm sorry. The guards almost didn't let me in." Kojo's face changed instantly, softened. It was the first unguarded emotion Abena had seen from him. "You came." "Of course I came." Essie smiled, then noticed Abena and dipped her head respectfully. "Congratulations, madam." Abena disliked the title immediately. "Abena." Essie blinked, surprised. "Congratulations, Abena." She turned back to Kojo and lowered her voice, though not enough. The landlord came again. Kojo's shoulders tightened. "He says if we don't pay by tomorrow, he locks the house." Abena said nothing, but every sense sharpened. Kojo asked quietly, how much Acey told him. It was not a large amount by Badu standards. It was life-changing money by his. "I'll handle it," he said, with what Acey whispered. "You already sold your tools last month for my tuition." Abena looked at him sharply. Sold his tools? The very tools of his trade. Kojo noticed her expression and glanced away. Essie realized too late what she had revealed. "I should go," she muttered. Kojo touched her shoulder gently. "Eat before you leave." She nodded and slipped back inside. The veranda grew quiet again. Abena's mind moved quickly. He needed money desperately. He had debt. He had responsibility. He had every reason to accept her father's envelope. Yet he refused. Why? What kind of man chooses struggle when comfort is one hand away? She asked. Kojo answered without turning. The kind who has seen what comfort costs some people. Before she could ask more, the ballroom doors burst open. Kwame strode onto the veranda, fury no longer hidden. There you are. His eyes went first to Abena, then to Kojo. Guests are asking questions. Investors are watching. And instead of smiling beside your wife, you disappear like staff on break. Kojo said evenly. Then answer their questions honestly. Kwame took 2 fast steps forward. You forget yourself. No, Kojo replied. I remember myself. That is the problem. Kwame's hand twitched as if tempted to strike him. Abena spoke before he could. Father. Both men turned. Her voice was calm but edged with something new. If appearances matter so much, perhaps stop creating scenes. Kwame stared at her in disbelief. She almost never contradicted him publicly. His humiliation was small, but visible. He leaned close to her chair, smile frozen for any hidden cameras. You are becoming ungrateful. Abena held his gaze. No. I am becoming observant. For 1 second, pure hatred flashed through his eyes. Then he stepped back, rearranged his face, and walked inside. Kojo exhaled slowly. You should be careful. So should you, she said. He gave the faintest smile. Too late for both of us. Later that night, long after the guests left and the estate quieted, Kojo brought Abena to the modest guest wing prepared for them. It was far from the main family suites. Another insult. He helped position the chair near the bed. I'll sleep on the sofa, he said. You don't have to. I know. He dimmed the lamp and lay down without another word. Minutes passed. Then his breathing deepened into sleep. Abena waited. 10 minutes. 20. Finally, she pushed herself upright. Her legs trembled as her feet touched the floor. Pain shot through one knee, sharp but manageable. Slowly, silently gripping the bedpost, Abena stood. Then took 1 step. Then another. Across the moonlit room, Kojo slept on the sofa, unaware. She turned toward him, breathing hard. All of them failed, she whispered to the darkness. Then her eyes rested on the man who had refused money, insult, and ease in a single day. But you. She took another shaking step. You may be the first mistake in my plan. Morning arrived without mercy. The Badu estate woke to polished shoes on marble, the hiss of pressed uniforms, the clink of porcelain, and the low, disciplined voices of servants who knew exactly how quietly they were expected to exist. Sunlight flooded the guest wing through tall cream curtains, warm and golden and false, as if light itself had chosen to ignore the poison in that house. Abena had not slept much. After standing in secret the night before, her legs still ached. The pain was deep in the muscles, familiar and private. She welcomed it. Pain was proof. Pain meant the lie still required effort. She was seated in her wheelchair again by the time Kojo woke. He rose from the sofa at once, as though rest were a luxury he still had not learned to trust. For a brief second he looked disoriented. Then he saw her already dressed in a simple morning wrapper laid out by the maids, and his expression settled into quiet alertness. You should have called me, he said. For what? To help you get ready. Abena adjusted the edge of the wrapper over her knees. I have had people helping me with everything for so long that I no longer remember which tasks belong to me. The words escaped before she could soften them. Kojo did not answer immediately. He crossed the room, poured water into a glass, and handed it to her without drama. Then maybe he said you should start taking some of them back. The sentence landed harder than it should have. Abena took the glass, her fingers brushing his for the briefest moment. No greed, no pity, no hunger to impress. He always behaved as if dignity were the most natural thing in the world, even here where dignity had long ago been priced, packaged, and sold. A maid knocked and entered with breakfast on a silver tray. She placed fruit tea, bread, and eggs on the table, then set a separate small bowl of thin porridge before Abena. Again, always the separate bowl, always the reduced portion, always the quiet suggestion that she was fragile, dependent, incomplete. Kojo saw it too. "You can leave the tray," he told the maid gently. Once she was gone, he moved the porridge aside and placed the plate of eggs and bread within Abena's reach. She looked at him. "You enjoy making enemies in this house." "I do not enjoy it," he said, "but they make it easy." Against her will, the corner of her mouth shifted, a tiny movement. Gone quickly. But Kojo noticed. He did not comment on it. That made it worse. After breakfast, Kwame sent word that the couple was expected at the family's textile warehouse on the industrial edge of the city. The message came dressed as courtesy. In truth, it was a test. Abena knew her father well enough to read the hidden meaning. If Kojo could be paraded in front of supervisors and workers, perhaps he would be shamed into obedience. If not, perhaps he could at least be reminded of his place. Kojo read the note once and folded it neatly. "Do we have a choice?" "In this house," Abena asked. "Only the expensive illusion of one." They left an hour later in a black SUV with tinted windows. A driver sat in front. 2 security men rode behind them in another vehicle. Even after the wedding, her family still moved her like valuable cargo rather than blood. The city changed as they drove. The manicured avenues of the wealthy district gave way to crowded roads, then open gutters, market stalls, corrugated roofs, mechanics' yards, women selling oranges under umbrellas, men carrying sacks on their backs beneath the sun. Abena watched through the window as the polished fiction of her family's world peeled away mile by mile. Kojo watched too, but differently. Not like a visitor. Like someone returning to the map of his own life. At the warehouse gates, workers paused to stare. The Badu logo towered above the entrance on a rusting metal sign. Inside, the air smelled of dust oil, dye, sweat, and cotton. Ceiling fans turned lazily overhead. Machines thundered in long rows. Supervisors barked over the noise, while women bent over sewing stations and men pushed heavy carts between stacks of packaged fabric. Abena had visited the company's luxury offices many times. She had rarely been brought here. That fact alone told her everything. Kwame stood on an elevated platform with 2 managers smiling as if he were unveiling a civic project instead of exploiting labor. "There they are," he called when he saw them. "My daughter and her husband." Heads turned. Conversations slowed. The room filled instantly with dangerous attention. Kojo wheeled Abena beside the platform, but did not step back like hired help. Kwame's eyes narrowed at once. "I thought today would be educational," Kwame announced to the workers. "A reminder that family loyalty and humility can lift even the lowest among us." Abena felt the insult like acid. "Even the lowest among us?" Kojo's face did not move. One manager, a thick-necked man named Mr. Dankwa, forced a laugh. "Yes, sir. Very inspiring." Kwame went on speaking, performing generosity for the room. He talked about sacrifice, second chances, charity. He spoke as if the marriage had been a benevolent act of family compassion rather than calculated disposal. Abena had heard him do this her whole life, turn violence into virtue with polished language and a tailored suit. But then something unexpected happened. A machine in the far row jammed with a metallic scream. The line stopped. Workers flinched. One young woman yanked her hands back just in time to avoid the needle snapping through her finger. Dankwa cursed and stormed toward the station. "Useless," he shouted. "Who touched this setting?" The young woman shook so hard she could barely speak. "Sir, I only followed yesterday's instruction." He raised his hand, not to point, to strike. Before Abena could even inhale, Kojo moved. He crossed the concrete floor in 3 long steps and caught Dankwa's wrist in midair. The entire warehouse froze. The machines were still quiet. Only the ceiling fans kept turning. Dankwa stared. "Remove your hand." Kojo released him immediately but did not step back. He crouched beside the jammed machine, studying it with one quick glance. His hands moved with instinctive confidence over the gears, thread path, and tension arm. "This setting wasn't changed by her," he said. "The feed assembly is worn. It slipped." Dankwa sneered. "And you know this because you repair luxury marriages now?" A few nervous laughs flickered and died. Kojo ignored them. He reached for a basic wrench from a nearby toolbox, loosened 2 bolts. Realigned the mechanism and tested the pedal. The machine coughed once, then began running smoothly again. Silence. Even Kwame looked caught off guard. The young worker stared at Kojo with stunned gratitude. "Thank you." Dankwa's face darkened. Public humiliation had touched him now, and men like him always needed blood in return. "Interesting," he said coldly. "So the groom is a mechanic after all. Not a husband, not a provider. A grease-handed fixer." Kojo stood. A working man. Dankwa stepped closer. A working man who should learn when not to speak. Kwame descended from the platform, sensing danger, but not to stop it. He wanted to see how Kojo would bend. "Dankwa," he said mildly. "There is no need for drama." But there was drama in his eyes. He wanted the outcome. He wanted Kojo broken in front of everyone. Dankwa folded his arms. "Actually, sir, perhaps this is useful. If he understands machines so well, let him sign the maintenance clearance for Line 3. We need the forms filed before inspection." One of the clerks hurried over with papers. Abena's attention sharpened. She recognized the tactic at once. Put a desperate man in front of a shortcut. Add pressure. Watch whether he lies. Kojo took the clipboard. His eyes scanned the document only briefly before his jaw tightened. "This machine has not been serviced," he said. "The brake assembly is overdue. The emergency stop is unreliable." Dankwa's expression did not change. "It works well enough. It could crush someone's hand. Sign." Kwame said nothing. That silence told Abena everything. Her father knew. He was allowing it. Kojo looked from the form to the machine, then to the workers standing nearby, especially the young woman who had nearly been hurt. "If I sign this," he said, "and someone gets injured, my name sits on the lie." Dankwa smiled without warmth. "Then think carefully. Men in your position do not reject opportunities." Abena felt the entire room leaning inward. This was the real test. Not the wedding. Not the envelope. This. A poor man standing in front of authority, risk and need. Kojo set the clipboard down. "No." Dankwa blinked. "What?" No, Kojo repeated. "Repair it first. Then I will sign the truth." Kwame's voice came soft and dangerous. "You are forgetting who is offering you work." Kojo turned to face him fully. "And you are forgetting who would bleed for your savings." For a moment, nobody breathed. Then Dankwa snapped, "Get out!" Kwame did not stop him. "Take your wife and leave the premises." Dankwa barked louder. "If you cannot support operations, you do not belong here." Kojo gave a single nod, as if dismissal were cleaner than compromise. He returned to Abena, gripped the wheelchair handles, and turned her toward the exit. The workers watched them go, some with fear, some with pity, a few with something like respect. Once outside, heat slammed into them. Trucks groaned in the loading yard. Dust blew across the concrete. Kojo kept pushing until they reached the shade of a wall near the gate. Only then did he stop. You just lost a job you did not even have yet, Abena said quietly. Kojo stared out at the road beyond the gates. Better than losing my name. She looked up at him, at the sweat on his temple, the tension in his jaw, the exhaustion he refused to dramatize. He had debts. A sister, rent, no safety, no rich family to cushion principle. And still he chose truth. In Abena's world, that was rarer than wealth, far rarer. For the first time, admiration rose in her without resistance. Not because he had defended her, not because he had spoken boldly, but because when no reward was certain and punishment was immediate, he had still refused to build his future on someone else's pain. Abena lowered her gaze before he could read too much in her face. Yet one thought stayed with her all the way back to the car, sharper than any she had allowed herself since the wedding began. Kojo Mensah was not simply kind, he was dangerous to every lie around him. By the time they returned to the Badu estate, the sun had already begun to sink. The sky above the city burned orange and copper, beautiful in the careless way nature often was, while human beings destroyed each other below it. The car rolled through the iron gates past trimmed hedges and marble statues and fountains shaped like swans, all of it shining with the smug perfection of money. From the outside, the Badu estate looked like stability. Inside it was a kingdom of rot. Abena felt it before the vehicle even stopped. The tension, the waiting. The servants did not meet her eyes as Kojo helped her down from the SUV. Two maids standing near the entrance stiffened when they saw them, then looked quickly away. One of the guards shifted his weight with the strained expression of a man who had already heard the coming explosion and wanted no part in it. Word had traveled fast from the warehouse. Kwame Badu had not found the husband he could purchase. He had found a man who embarrassed him in public, and powerful men did not forgive humiliation. Kojo must have sensed it too, because his hands on the wheelchair handles became even more controlled than usual. Not tense, not uncertain, deliberate, like a man walking through a field where snakes hid under every stone. As soon as they entered the main hall, Akosua Badu descended the staircase in a silk evening dress, the color of poisonously bright wine. She did not greet her daughter. She looked straight at Kojo. So she said, voice smooth and sharp at once, "You have begun destroying things already." Abena lifted her chin. He did not destroy anything. Akosua's eyes flicked to her cold with surprise. Her mother rarely heard interruption from her. Defiance had never been encouraged in the Badu house. Submission was the family religion. Reputation was the god. Akosua turned back to Kojo. My husband tried to place you in honest work for one afternoon, and you repaid him by insulting management in front of laborers. Kojo answered evenly. If honest work depends on unsafe machines and falsified forms, the insult did not come from me. Akosua's mouth tightened. Listen to him. One night in this family, and he thinks morality has invited him to speak. Morality, Abena said quietly, would be a refreshing guest in this house. The words landed like dropped glass. A maid near the doorway almost gasped aloud before catching herself. Akosua went still. Then very slowly she descended the remaining steps. The closer she came, the more Abena saw what others often missed beneath her beauty and polish. Akosua Badu had the terrifying calm of someone who had practiced cruelty until it became elegant. She never needed to scream first. Her silence could wound more deeply than most people's rage. She stopped in front of Abena's chair. You have become very bold for a woman who survives because this family still feeds her. Abena met her gaze. It cost her something. It always did. Years of training did not vanish in one day. Her body still knew how to flinch under her mother's voice, even if her face no longer showed it. But Kojo was standing behind her, steady as stone, and for reasons Abena refused to examine too closely, that changed the shape of fear. I survive, Abena said, Because I learned how to endure people who mistake ownership for love. Akasua's nostrils flared. For one terrible second, Abena thought her mother might strike her right there in the hall. Instead, Akasua stepped back and smiled. That smile was worse. Very well, she said. Since your husband cannot behave like a grateful beggar, perhaps both of you would prefer to live somewhere more fitting. Kwame's voice entered from the doorway behind them. Yes, he said. I think that would be best. He had returned, and he was no longer pretending civility. He strode into the hall with the clipped, dangerous energy of a man who had spent the drive home feeding his anger. Two of his legal advisers hovered behind him carrying folders. Kofi Badu Abena's cousin, always eager to align himself with whichever relative seemed most powerful, stood nearby with his usual oily half-smile. Abena's pulse slowed, not quickened. That always happened in moments of real danger. Her fear became cold, focused. "What are you doing?" she asked. Kwame stopped before them and adjusted his cufflinks, buying himself the pleasure of control. "Correcting a mistake," he said. "This marriage has become inconvenient." Kojo's hands tightened just once on the handles of the wheelchair, then relaxed again. "Inconvenient," he repeated. "That is a strange word for your daughter's life." Kwame ignored him. He nodded to one of the advisers who opened a folder and drew out documents. "A quiet annulment is still possible if handled immediately," Kwame said to Abena, as if discussing a routine account transfer. "You will sign. He will sign. The story will be that you were emotionally unstable after the ceremony, and the union was never properly completed." Abena stared at him. Not shocked. Not exactly. There was something almost relieving in seeing the mask fully drop. Her father's cruelty was exhausting when disguised as concern. In its naked form, it was at least honest. "And if I refuse?" she asked. Kwame's eyes hardened. "Then your husband leaves here tonight with nothing. No work, no reference, no access to any employer who values my name. And you?" He leaned closer. "You will remember what life looks like when every comfort disappears." Kojo spoke before Abena could. "You are threatening her in front of witnesses." "No," Kwame said. "I am educating her in consequences." Kofi gave a soft laugh from the side, enjoying himself. Abena turned her head toward him. The look she gave him made the laugh die in his throat. Then she faced her father again. "You forced this marriage to preserve the family's image. Now you want to erase it because the man you bought would not kneel. Which part is the consequence, father? The marriage or your wounded pride?" For the first time in years, Kwame Badu looked genuinely wrong-footed by his daughter. That lasted only a breath. Then he recovered and nodded toward the papers. "Sign." Kojo stepped around the chair so that he now stood beside Abena instead of behind her. The shift was small, but the meaning of it was not. "I will not sign anything without reading it," he said. Kwame laughed once, humorless. "You think this is negotiation?" "No," Kojo said. "I think this is cowardice dressed as procedure." The insult hit its target. Kwame moved so fast one of the maids yelped. He seized Kojo by the front of his shirt and shoved him backward against the polished wall. Gasps echoed through the hall. The legal advisers froze. The servants looked down. Kofi took one eager step forward, hoping perhaps for a fight. Abena's heart slammed once, not from fear for the scene, from the sudden searing realization that if Kojo hit back, her father would destroy him. Kojo did not raise his hands. He let himself be pinned, his jaw, hard eyes steady on Kwame's face. "You are in my house," Kwame hissed. "You eat because I allow it. You breathe easier because I have not yet decided otherwise." Abena spoke with a force that surprised even her. "Take your hands off my husband." The hall went dead silent. Every servant heard it, every advisor heard it. Kofi actually blinked. Akosua turned sharply toward her daughter. Abena did not look away from her father. I said she repeated each word clean and cold. Take your hands off my husband. Kwame's grip loosened by instinct before his mind caught up. For one brief second, power shifted in the room, not because he had changed, but because everyone present had just seen that his daughter was no longer entirely afraid of him. That was dangerous. He released Kojo and stepped back, straightening his jacket as if he had done nothing improper. Akosua recovered first. This is absurd, she snapped. Abena, look at him. He has no status, no pedigree, no future. A week from now you will beg us to clean up this disgrace. Abena turned slowly toward her mother. And in that moment, something old inside her, something bent and bruised and trained into silence, rose to its feet. Maybe it was Kojo refusing the envelope. Maybe it was the machine form he would not sign. Maybe it was years of swallowing humiliation until there was no room left for it. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe she was finally tired. He has more honor in his hands than this entire family has in its blood, Abena said. The sentence cracked through the hall like thunder. Akosua's face drained of color. Kofi sputtered. Do you hear yourself? Oh, I hear myself very clearly, Abena said, turning on him now. For once, perhaps you should try the same. Her cousin actually stepped back. Kwame lifted the papers again, desperate now to reassert control through documents, signatures, systems. Anything but raw power which had just failed him in public. You are emotional, he said. We will revisit this when you are calmer. No, Abena said. The word was simple. Final. I will not sign an annulment. I will not dismiss my husband to save your reputation, and I will not continue pretending your cruelty is discipline. The legal advisors looked at one another. One quietly closed his folder. They had just understood that this matter was no longer clean. Public scandal had become possible. Kwame saw it too. That made him more dangerous. He looked at Kojo with quiet hatred. This defiance will cost you. Kojo smoothed the front of his shirt where it had been wrinkled and answered, Then send the bill to me. Abena almost laughed from sheer disbelief. Not because it was funny, because it was impossible. How could this man speak like that when he had nothing? Unless dignity itself was a kind of wealth. Kwame turned sharply and walked away before the scene could crumble further. Akosua followed, but not before throwing Abena one last look, a promise, not a retreat. Kofi hesitated, eager to say something poisonous, then thought better of it and hurried after them. The hall emptied in fragments. Servants dispersed, advisors disappeared. At last, only Abena and Kojo remained. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Kojo exhaled slowly. You did not have to do that. Abena kept her eyes ahead. Yes, she said. I did. He was quiet. When she finally turned, he was looking at her differently. Not with gratitude, with recognition. As if he had just seen the outline of a woman inside the role everyone forced her to perform. That unsettled her more than any insult. So she looked away first. Outside, evening settled fully over the estate. Inside, the war had changed. Because for the first time, Abena had chosen her side out loud, and her family had heard her. The next morning did not arrive with peace. It arrived with engines, deep synchronized expensive engines that rolled through the gates of the Bardu estate just after sunrise, and shattered the careful silence of the compound. Servants looked up from flower beds and silver trays. Guards straightened. Maids paused in hallways with folded linens in their arms. By the time the first black luxury sedan stopped in the circular drive, half the household was already watching through windows. Abena heard the commotion from the guest wing. She had been sitting near the open curtains, wrapped in a pale robe, pretending to read. While her mind replayed the previous night in sharp fragments, her father's hand on Kojo's shirt, her own voice cutting through the hall, the strange look in Kojo's eyes afterward. She had spent years mastering control, yet everything around him seemed to drag hidden parts of her into the light. Another engine stopped, then another. Kojo, who had just finished buttoning the cuffs of the only clean shirt he had left, went still beside the mirror. "That is not your family's usual morning noise," he said. "No," Abena replied softly. "It isn't." She knew those engines, not the exact cars. The rhythm, the order, the precision. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket across her lap. Kojo noticed. "Do you know who it is?" Abena did not answer immediately. Because the truth was simple. Yes, and she had hoped for a few more days before her two worlds collided. A knock struck the door. Not timid, not casual, measured. The sort of knock made by someone trained to serve power without ever forgetting that he carried a fragment of it himself. Kojo crossed the room and opened the door. A tall, elderly man stood outside in an immaculate dark suit, silver-haired posture straight as a spear. Behind him were two women in tailored uniforms, 3 security men, and a younger assistant holding a leather case. The old man's eyes moved first to Kojo, taking in the worn shirt, the tired face, the guarded stillness. Then he looked past him, to Abena, and in an instant the years fell away from his composed expression. He bowed. Not a polite nod. A full, unmistakable bow. "Madame," he said, voice thick with emotion, carefully restrained. "We have been searching everywhere." Kojo turned slowly toward Abena. Silence filled the room like floodwater. Abena closed the book on her lap. "Nana Kweku," she said. The old man straightened, relief and grief crossing his face at once. "Yes, madam." Kojo's brows drew together. "You know him?" Abena looked at the floor for one brief second. This was the moment. There would be no gentle path through it now. No gradual reveal. No extra time bought by silence. The doors had opened, and Truth had walked in wearing polished shoes. "Please come in," she said. Nana Kweku entered with the solemn dignity of a man stepping back into a role he had feared was lost. The 2 uniformed women followed, carrying garment bags and medical files. The assistant remained near the door, eyes lowered. Kojo stepped aside automatically, though every line in his body had gone rigid. From the hallway beyond, hurried footsteps approached. Word had spread. Of course it had. Within seconds, Kwame and Akosua appeared at the doorway, both still in mourning attire, but already wearing faces prepared for battle. Kofi hovered behind them in a silk robe, curiosity glowing in his eyes like greed. Kwame looked from the old man to the security detail, to the cars visible through the courtyard windows. Then to Abena. Something sharp and wary moved behind his expression. "Who," he asked carefully, "are these people?" Nana Kweku turned. The old steward's gaze landed on Kwame Badu with all the warmth of a locked gate. "We are here for Madame Abena Owusu." The name struck the room like a dropped blade. Not Abena Badu. Abena Owusu. Kojo stared at her. Akosua's lips parted. Kofi blinked twice, thrown entirely. Kwame recovered first. "You are mistaken. This is my daughter Abena Badu." "No," said Nana Kweku. He spoke quietly. That made it worse. "This is Abena Serwa Owusu Sole Air, and current chairwoman of Adam Global Group, granddaughter of the late Kwaku Owusu." He paused just long enough for the title to settle into every corner of the room. "She has lived under your roof by arrangement and under protection. That arrangement is over." Nobody moved. Even the air seemed shocked. Kojo looked at Abena as if the floor beneath him had shifted. Chairwoman. Air. Protection. Every word widened the distance between the woman in the wheelchair and the woman he was apparently only now meeting. Akosua found her voice first brittle and disbelieving. "What nonsense is this?" Abena raised her eyes. and when she spoke, the softness that had allowed others to underestimate her was gone. "It is not nonsense, Mother. It is the truth." Kwame's face drained, then hardened. "Explain." Abena let the silence stretch a moment longer, let them feel the crack opening under everything they thought they controlled. "My birth certificate was changed after my mother's sister died," she said. "I was placed in this family as a child because my grandfather believed blood ties would keep me safe while he consolidated the Owusu holdings. When he died, the custody arrangement remained hidden inside trust structures and board protections until I came of age." Kofi frowned, confused. "You're saying you were never really—" "I am saying Abena cut in that I was more useful to this family as an asset than as a daughter." That shut him up. Nana Kweku opened the leather case and removed documents sealed with legal stamps. "Madam has been missing from official residence for several weeks. Her absence triggered a private search. The board has been informed. The executive trustees are waiting." Kwame took a step forward. "This is absurd. She has lived here for years. She is under my guardianship." Was Nana Kweku corrected? "Not is." "Then because old men who have served empires know exactly where to place the knife," he added, "and any authority you once exercised was conditional on Madam's welfare. A matter that may soon be reviewed." For the first time since Kojo had met him, Kwame Badu looked uncertain. That lasted only a second. Then his anger took over. He turned on Abena. "You hid this." "In my house?" Abena almost laughed at the phrasing, as if deception were a sin only when practiced by someone with less power. "Yes," she said. "I hid it." Why her eyes did not leave his? Because men with money had already tried to own me. I wanted to know whether anyone would see me without the fortune first. The answer should have belonged to the room, but it landed hardest on Kojo. She felt it without needing to look, felt the way silence changed shape beside her. Slowly she turned toward him. He had gone very still, not stunned in the dramatic way some men were. No, worse. He looked wounded, not by the wealth itself, by the concealment. "You knew," he said. It was not an accusation shouted in fury, just 4 words spoken low and flat, stripped of everything except truth. "Yes?" And the wheelchair Abena held his gaze. Not a complete lie, but not the full truth. His jaw flexed. He looked away for the first time since the room had exploded around them. That hurt more than she expected. Akosua seized the opening immediately. "You see," she said to Kojo, "even you were being used. She tested you. She made a fool of you like everyone else." "Be quiet," Abena said, but Akosua was too desperate now to stop. "You thought you married a helpless burden. Instead, you married a woman richer than everyone in this house combined. Tell me, Kojo, does that make you feel chosen or cheap?" Kojo did not answer her. He kept looking at Abena, and because she had spent years reading rooms for danger, she understood this one instantly. If she lied now, even gently, she would lose him. So she did not lie. "I did test people," she said, "because I had reason." His voice remained painfully calm. "Was I a husband to you, or an experiment?" The question sliced deeper than her mother's poison ever could. Abena opened her mouth, closed it. Because the cruel answer was that at first he had been both, and now he was something far worse. Someone whose opinion mattered. "That changed," she said quietly. Kojo laughed once without humor and stepped back. "Changed." Such a small word for a wound that large. Nana Kweku, sensing the fracture, spoke carefully. "Madam, the board car is ready. The trustees request your presence today." Kwame lifted a hand sharply. "She is not going anywhere until she is going wherever she wishes," said the old steward. Security shifted subtly at the door. Not aggressive, prepared. The balance of power in the room had turned so completely it almost made sound. Abena looked at the faces around her. Kwame furious, calculating. Akosua humiliated, vicious. Kofi already trying to guess which side offered better survival. Then Kojo, still, silent, gone somewhere behind his own eyes. That was the face she could not bear. She reached for the arm of the chair and rose, slightly steadying herself. Not fully standing. Not yet. But enough to move with more control than anyone in the room expected. The two uniformed women stepped forward instinctively. Abena stopped them with a glance. "I will go," she said. Quirm stepped into her path. "If you walk out with these people, do not expect this family to welcome you back." Abena looked at him with something close to pity. "This family," she said, "has never welcomed me. It only managed me." Then she turned to Kojo. For 1 second she thought he might speak. Ask something. Stop her. Instead he stepped aside. Not out of submission. Out of distance. That hurt more than any insult her parents had ever designed. Nanakweku moved behind her chair, but Abena stopped him too. "No." She placed her own hands on the wheels and pushed forward herself. Past Kwame. Past Akosua. Past Kofi. Out through the doorway and into the blinding white morning, where a line of black cars waited like a second life returning to claim her. Behind her, the house remained silent. Behind her, the lie had died. And somewhere inside that crumbling silence stood the one man who had married her without knowing her worth, now staring at the truth and wondering whether anything between them had ever been real at all. The gates of Owusu House opened without a sound. That was the first thing Kojo noticed when the convoy carrying Abena disappeared from the Badu estate and entered the private road of her real world. No shouting guards, no nervous servants, no theatrical display of wealth designed to humiliate outsiders. Just silence, precision, and space. Too much space. It unsettled him more than noise. By the time Nanakweku helped Abena into the central residence, a vast modern mansion of glass, stone, and dark wood overlooking the city. Her mind was no longer inside the walls around her. It had been left behind in the guest wing of the Badu estate, in the stunned stillness on Kojo's face when he realized the truth. She had prepared for anger. She had prepared for accusation. She had even prepared for disgust. She had not prepared for hurt. The difference between the two was destroying her. Madam, one of the attendants, asked softly, "Shall I call the physiotherapist or the legal team first?" Abena blinked. The marble foyer gleamed beneath hanging bronze lights. Staff moved with discreet efficiency. Her old portrait, painted 3 years earlier, when she still allowed the board to stage manage her image, hung at the far end of the hall. In it she looked untouchable, regal, cold, a stranger. The legal team, she said. Of course, war first, pain later. That was how she had survived for years. Within the hour, Adam Global Group's Executive Council Chief Financial Officer and 2 trustees were assembled in the West Conference Room. Files covered the polished table. Screens displayed share structures, trust arrangements, executive transfers, and flag markers from recent transactions. The atmosphere was controlled urgent professional. Abena took her seat at the head of the table. The room straightened around her. The chairwoman had returned. "Let's begin," she said. Council did. Quietly, efficiently, relentlessly. During her absence, several unusual authorizations had been pushed through secondary entities tied to Badu family holdings. Not enough to seize Adam Global outright, but enough to weaken her decision-making power over time if left untouched. Some internal memos suggested pressure had been applied to medical advisors who monitored her recovery. Other documents hinted that rumors about her instability and limited capacity had been circulated to justify future oversight. Abena listened without interrupting. Each page confirmed what she had suspected for years. Kwame and Akosua had not merely exploited her trust. They had engineered dependence around her. "They want to prove you are medically incapable of leading," said the chief counsel. "They've been trying to do that since I was 22, Abena replied. The CFO glanced up. "Then, with respect, madame, your marriage complicates matters." The room cooled. Abena lifted her eyes. "Explain." The CFO cleared his throat. "A sudden marriage to an unknown laborer from a poor district will be framed as evidence of emotional instability. They will say you were manipulated. Worse, if your husband contests anything publicly, they may claim he was planted." Abena's hand tightened once around her pen. Planted, manipulated. Unknown laborer. The polished language of elite people always found refined ways to erase a good man. "He was not planted," she said. The counsel nodded. "Understood. But that will not stop them from saying it." Her pulse remained steady. Her chest did not. Because beneath all the boardroom strategy, another truth beat like a bruise. Kojo did not know whether he believed her anymore. The meeting stretched for hours. Emergency injunctions were drafted. Shareholder communications were planned. Private investigators were tasked with tracing shell transactions linked to the Badu family. A review of her medical files was ordered. The board wanted to move fast, hit hard, regain narrative control. Abena agreed to all of it. She spoke clearly, decisively, brilliantly if judged by the faces around the table. But several times, while others argued over clauses and optics, her mind slipped sideways to a single memory. Kojo standing under the jacaranda tree, refusing her father's envelope. "If I wanted payment for standing beside your daughter, I would be cheaper than you deserve." And now he probably believed he had been the cheapest fool in the room. By late afternoon, when the final advisor left, Abena stood alone in the conference room, staring at the city through the glass wall. Her legs ached from sitting too long. The old injury throbbed in one hip. She welcomed the pain. Physical pain was clean, understandable. It did not speak in questions. A light knock came at the door. Nana Kweku entered carrying tea. He had known her since childhood, before titles hardened around her. He set the tray down without speaking. "You want to ask, Abena?" Said, "Yes." She waited. The old steward folded his hands behind his back. "Do you regret revealing yourself when you did?" Abena stared at the skyline. "No." A pause. Then softer. "I regret that he had to learn it in that room." Nana Kweku said nothing for a moment. Then the man looked more wounded than greedy. That undid something in her. She turned away sharply, but not before he saw it. "Yes," she said. "That is the problem." Meanwhile, across the city, Kojo Mensah walked home under a sky turning violet with evening. He had left the Badu estate 2 hours after Abena's departure. Not dramatically, not in fury. He simply packed the small bag he had arrived with, ignored Akosua's final taunt that men like him always leave once the game changes, and stepped out through the servants' gate, because he refused to exit through the front as if he owed the house a performance. Now he walked the dusty roads of his district with his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow and his mind tearing itself apart. Children ran between kiosks. A woman shouted prices over a basket of tomatoes. Motorbikes coughed past. Music drifted from a roadside bar. Life went on with insulting normalcy, while inside him everything had split. At first the shock had been simple. Abena was rich, powerful, hidden. But that shock did not last. What remained was more complicated. He replayed every moment since the wedding. Her measured silences. The way she watched him when she thought he was not looking. The way she had known how to absorb humiliation without surprise, as though she had studied cruelty from the inside. The way she had defended him in the hall. The way her face changed when he refused lies. Had any of that been false? No. His instincts resisted that conclusion. She had concealed her identity. Yes, she had tested people. Yes. But the pain in her eyes when he asked whether he was a husband or an experiment that had not been performance. That had been a wound meeting another wound in real time. He hated that he knew the difference. By the time he reached the small rented house, Essie was waiting outside on the low concrete step. She stood at once when she saw him. Well, Kojo dropped his bag just inside the doorway and leaned both hands against the frame for a second before answering. She is not who I thought. Essie searched his face. Is she cruel? He blinked. The question cut straight through all the layers. No, he said after a long pause. Not cruel. Did she mock you? No. Did she use you to steal from you? A humorless breath escaped him. She had enough money to buy the street easy. There was nothing to steal. Her eyes widened. What? He sat heavily on the wooden chair by the table and told her. Not everything, not the parts that still felt too raw to shape. But enough. About Nana Kweku. About Adam Global. About the hidden identity. About the trust structures. About the old name. About the moment the room changed. Essie listened with both hands over her mouth. When he finished, she sat slowly opposite him. So she whispered, You married a billionaire. Kojo rubbed a hand over his face. Apparently. And you look like someone died. That made him laugh once bitter and tired. Maybe the version of the story I believed did. Essie was quiet. Then she said, Did she ever treat you like you were beneath her? No. Did she ever shame you for being poor? No. Then what exactly is breaking you? He looked at his sister, at her young face sharpened by hardship, but not yet ruined by it. And because she deserved honesty, he gave it. I do not know whether the kindness between us belonged to us, he said quietly, or to the test she built around me. Essie leaned back, thinking. After a while she asked, When you helped her, did you know who she was? No. And would you have done it differently if you had known? He answered instantly. No. Then the part of you that matters was real. He said nothing. She leaned forward. The better question is whether the part of her that mattered was real. That stayed with him long after dark. Later that night, in a bedroom larger than his entire house, Abena sat alone on the edge of a bed she had once considered a fortress. The room smelled faintly of cedar and rain. City lights shimmered beyond the balcony glass. On the side table lay 3 unread briefing folders and a secure phone that had buzzed all evening with board updates. She ignored all of it. Instead, she stared at the plain wedding ring still on her finger. It looked absurd against wealth. Simple, quiet, honest. More valuable than the diamonds in her vault. A knock sounded. Nana Kweku again. Madam, he said from the door. Shall I arrange for Mr. Mensah to be brought here tomorrow? Abena closed her hand over the ring. For a second, the answer rose in her throat. Yes. Bring him. Explain everything. Fight for what is breaking. But something older and prouder stopped her. If Kojo came because power summoned him, then she would never know whether he came freely. No, she said at last. He must choose his own steps. Nana Kweku bowed and withdrew. Alone again, Abena stood slowly using the bedpost for support. Her injured leg trembled. She took one careful step, then another across the carpet in the darkened room, breathing through the pain. She was training again, not for the board, not for the public, for something harder, for the possibility that the only man who had loved her without knowing her worth might now walk away precisely because he had discovered it. Across the city, Kojo lay awake on a narrow mattress, staring at a cracked ceiling, while Essie slept in the next room. He had every reason to let go. A woman like Abena belonged to a world built from gates, suits, lawyers, and secrets. A man like him belonged to sweat-rent bus fares, broken tools, and names no boardroom ever learned. Yet one truth would not leave him alone. When she defended him in that hall, Abena had not sounded like a billionaire protecting an investment. She had sounded like a woman terrified of losing the only decent thing she had found in a life full of masks. And that made leaving far more difficult than pride wanted to admit. By midnight, both of them were still awake. Separate, silent, wounded in different houses under the same sky. Neither knew it yet, but the next move would not come from wealth or anger. It would come from the simple, devastating question. Both were now afraid to ask aloud. If the truth arrived late, could love still survive it? Rain began just before dawn. Not the dramatic kind that announced itself with thunder and violence, but a slow, steady African rain that turned dust into dark earth and laid a grey hush over the city. By 6 in the morning, the roofs of Kojo's district were glistening. Drainage gutters were running brown, and the narrow lane outside his house smelled of wet cement rust and cooking charcoal. Kojo had not slept. He had closed his eyes. He had lain still. He had listened to the rain and the restless turning of his own thoughts until sunrise pressed weakly through the small window above his bed. Then he got up. As he was already awake, heating water on the stove. She looked over her shoulder. "You're leaving." It was not a question. Kojo buttoned the cuffs of an old work shirt, the blue one with oil stains that never fully washed out. "Yes." "To see her? No." Essie folded her arms. "That is a lie." He gave her a tired look. "I am not going to see her. I am going to find out who has been circling her all this time." She watched him for a long second. "That sounds worse." "Probably. And more dangerous." "Yes." Essie lowered the spoon into the pot and turned fully toward him. "Then at least call it by the right name. You are helping her." Kojo took his old jacket from the hook near the door. "I am helping the truth. The rest is undecided." Essie's mouth twitched. "You always say noble things when you want to avoid emotional ones." He almost smiled. Almost. Then he stepped out into the rain. Across the city, Abena sat in the private rehabilitation studio on the lower floor of Owusu House, one hand gripping the parallel bar, the other braced against the shoulder of her physiotherapist. Sweat slid down her neck despite the cool morning air. Her injured leg trembled violently under her weight. Every step sent hot pain through the hip and knee she had spent years protecting. "One more," the therapist said softly. Abena took another step. Her breath broke. Another. The bar creaked beneath her grip. Another. By the time she reached the end, she was shaking so hard that Nana Kweku, who stood quietly by the door with her schedule in hand, almost moved forward out of instinct. Abena straightened slowly and waved the therapist back. Again. "Madam," the woman said carefully, "you've already doubled yesterday's distance?" Again. She did not say why, did not say that every step felt like a promise she had made to no one out loud, did not say that part of her no longer wanted a life spent hidden behind Symbol's wheelchair title, pity power. She wanted to know who she was when stripped of every shield. By noon, the legal updates had begun. One shell entity linked to the Badu family had already started moving funds offshore. A private physician who once handled her recovery records had become suddenly unavailable. 2 former board consultants were refusing calls. The pattern was no longer subtle. Someone was cleaning tracks. In the West study, Abena stood at the window while counsel briefed her over speakerphone. "We can freeze certain transactions," the lawyer said, "but if the falsified medical narrative was circulated through unofficial channels, we need human testimony as much as documents." Abena looked out at the rainwater sliding down the stone terrace. Then find the people who were pressured. We're trying. The word irritated her, because somewhere in the city Kwame Badu was not trying. He was moving. She ended the call and turned to Nana Kweku. Get me every employment file from the Badu textile warehouse, especially supervisors, machine technicians, maintenance clerks, and dismissed workers from the last 5 years. The old steward inclined his head. At once. A pause. Then and Mr. Mensah. Abena's face changed only slightly. Yet Nana saw it. Has he contacted us? She asked. No, madam. That should not have hurt. But it did. Then leave him out of the discussion, she said. Nana bowed. He knew when an instruction was real and when it was armor. This one was both. Meanwhile, Kojo's day led him first to the industrial quarter. The warehouse district looked different in rain. The dust was gone, but the damage was clearer. Rust bled from metal awnings. Mud collected in potholes deep enough to twist ankles. Delivery trucks sprayed filthy water over laborers who jumped aside too late. The Badu textile facility stood at the end of the road like a tired animal. Its sign half faded, its walls streaked with years of neglect, hidden behind the respectable language of business reports. Kojo did not go through the front. He knew better. Instead, he crossed behind the neighboring dye plant, cut through an alley, stacked with broken pallets, and found the tea stall where workers gathered during shift changes. A few men recognized him at once from the day before. The groom, one said. Kojo ignored that. He bought tea for 4 men, and 2 women waited until the first suspicion softened, then asked the question that mattered. How long has Liner 3 been unsafe? Eyes shifted. Nobody answered. He took a slow sip from the steaming cup. Unsafe machines do not stay quiet forever. Neither do injured hands. An older machinist named Ofori finally snorted. You speak like someone with no children to feed. I speak like someone who has buried enough pride for rent and still knows when blood is being priced too cheaply. That earned silence of a different kind. Not agreement. Attention. By the end of an hour, Kojo had learned enough to confirm what Abena's lawyers suspected. Maintenance forms had been falsified for months. Workers injured on faulty equipment were pressured to sign statements blaming operator error. Danqua, the supervisor, was only part of it. Above him, someone from the Badu family office regularly approved cost-saving delays. Medical reimbursements disappeared. Complaints vanished. Who handles the signatures, Kojo asked. A younger clerk glanced around before answering. Not one person. Depends on the week. But when the big inspections come, Mr. Kofi's office sends instructions. Kofi. That fit too easily. Kojo pressed further. And the medical records. This time the workers looked genuinely uneasy. Finally, one woman leaned in. There was a doctor, she whispered. Private. Came with management cars. He didn't treat workers. He reviewed files. Special files. Kojo's pulse sharpened. Whose? She hesitated. Then said, the daughter's. Not Abena. The daughter. That was how the workers thought of her. Not as an executive. Not as a rumor. As the woman upstairs in the family who was always being spoken for. Kojo set down his cup carefully. Do you know his name? She did. By afternoon, Kojo had a name, an old clinic address, and a deeper problem than he wanted, because now the shape of the betrayal was changing. This was no longer only about money. It was about building a false reality around a woman until dependence looked medically justified. He left the warehouse district soaked and angry. The clinic he found was half abandoned, squeezed between a pharmacy and a betting shop in a neighborhood once fashionable and now decaying. The signboard hung crooked. Inside the waiting room smelled of old paper and bleach. A receptionist in a wrinkled uniform claimed the doctor no longer practiced there. Kojo believed her, but not fully. He placed enough cash on the desk to mean sacrifice, not wealth. Then tell me where his records went. The woman stared at the money, then at his face, then slowly opened a drawer. She wrote down the address of a storage office and slid it across. I never gave you that. You just saved someone, Kojo said. Her expression changed at that. People who were used to participating in harm often looked shaken when someone named the possibility of goodness in front of them. By early evening, he stood in a dim records office on the edge of the city, arguing with a bored administrator who claimed confidentiality, legal exposure, and missing permissions in one breath. Kojo listened until he saw, stacked behind a metal partition, 3 archive cartons marked with the clinic code and the doctor's initials. He changed tactics. Not force. Truth. A woman's life is being controlled by papers signed in rooms like this, he said quietly. If those records were altered, whoever hid them is already preparing to leave you carrying the blame. The administrator's eyes flickered. There. Fear. Kojo pressed once more. I am not asking you to break the law. I am asking you whether the law has already been broken around you. That did it. 20 minutes later, a photocopied set of transfer logs sat in his hands. Nothing final, nothing dramatic, but enough. Dates, file numbers, unusual access requests. One authorization linked through a consulting office used by Kofi Badu. Another tied to a legal retainer paid by a Badu holding company. Kojo looked at the pages until the letters blurred. Abena had not imagined it. She had been caged on paper. Outside, the rain had eased into mist. Street lights flickered on one by one as evening deepened. Kojo stood beneath the overhang of the records office, damp pages inside his jacket, and felt the full weight of what he was doing. He was already in this fight. Whether Pride liked it or not, whether Hurt approved or not, whether Abena deserved his trust fully or not. He could not unknow what he now knew, and because he could not, he also could not walk away. At Owusu House, Abena was in the library when Nana Kweku entered with fresh updates and stopped mid-step. She had fallen asleep in the armchair beside the cold fireplace, one legal file open across her lap, reading glasses still on the wedding ring, catching a stripe of lamplight on her hand. For a long moment, the old steward simply looked at her, at the exhaustion, at the loneliness of command, at the strange tenderness of that small plain ring against all the wealth around it. Then she woke, straightened, removed the glasses. What is it? Nana hesitated. Some employment files have already started disappearing from the Badu warehouse archives. Abena was fully alert in a second. How many? We do not know yet. She rose too fast, winced, and steadied herself on the arm of the chair. Then, before she could stop herself, she asked the one question she had been holding back all day. And Mr. Mensah Nana looked at her carefully. Still no contact. But this time he added, if he is the man. I think he is. Silence does not mean absence. Abena held his gaze. Hope was dangerous. Still it moved inside her anyway. Far across the city, Kojo turned toward home with damp evidence beneath his jacket and one decision hardening in his chest. He would not go to Abena because her money could summon him. He would not go because pain missed her. He would go because truth had to be put into the hands of the one person it was meant to free. And if that meant selling the last thing of value he owned to finish what he had started, then so be it. The shareholders' hall of Adam Global Group had been designed to intimidate. Everything in it announced power before a single word was spoken. The ceiling rose in dark, geometric panels above a floor of polished stone. Glass walls overlooked the city from 30 stories up, turning the skyline itself into a backdrop for wealth. At the far end stood the long, curved board dais beneath the company's bronze crest. 2 giant screens waited on either side, blank for now, like eyes not yet opened. By 8:30 that morning, the room was already filling. Executives in tailored suits, senior investors, legal observers. 2 discreet members of the press who had been invited under the language of transparency, assistants moving like shadows, security stationed at every entrance. Today was not supposed to be a battle. It had been announced as an emergency governance review, but everyone important in the room knew what that meant. A coup looked more respectable when it wore procedural clothing. Abena sat in a private holding room behind the hall, dressed in a structured ivory suit with a soft gold blouse, her hair pinned neatly away from her face. On the table beside her were board packets, witness lists, preliminary injunction drafts, and a glass of water she had barely touched. Her leg ached under the tailored fabric. She had insisted on using the wheelchair for the public entrance, not because she needed it absolutely in every moment, but because today was not about performance. Today was about control. Nanakwekwu adjusted the folder order one final time. The trustees are in position, and the external auditors arrived. The medical reviewers, waiting in conference, Abena nodded. Her counsel Ama Serwa stepped in with a tablet and the focused expression of a woman who had spent all night preparing to set fire to polished lies. Kofi's camp filed a last-minute memorandum, she said. They're arguing that your recent conduct shows diminished judgment. Marriage instability, unexplained disappearance, concealed mobility fluctuations, erratic decision patterns. Of course they are, Abena said. Ama looked up. There's more. Abena held her gaze. They want temporary operational oversight transferred to a special committee, chaired by Kwame Badu. For 1 second, something like laughter moved inside Abena. Not because it was funny, because the greed was so naked now it almost lost elegance. My father always did prefer theft when disguised as duty. Ama's mouth shifted the closest she came to amusement during warfare. Then perhaps today is the day we remove the disguise. A knock sounded. One of the junior legal aides entered slightly breathless. Madam, the hall is ready. Abena placed both hands on the arms of the chair and rose, not fully upright for long, just enough to center herself. Pain flashed through her hip. She welcomed it. A clean thing, a private thing, a truth that belonged to her body and no one else. Then she sat again. Let's begin, she said. When the doors opened and Abena was wheeled into the hall, the room shifted. Not loudly, but visibly. Conversations lowered, heads turned, pens paused above paper. People who had spent days hearing rumors finally saw the woman at the center of them, composed, pale with controlled fatigue, but unmistakably present. At the opposite sides of the hall, Kwame Badu was already seated beside Kofi and 3 allied board members. He wore a dark suit, a calm face, and the expression of a man determined to behave like the victim of his daughter's instability. Kofi, by contrast, had not managed elegance. His smile twitched too often. His fingers tapped the table. He looked like a thief trying to impersonate a statesman. Akosua sat in the second row among invited family observers, dressed in severe green silk, beautiful as a serpent. Abena did not look at her long. She took her place at the central executive position on the dais. Ama sat to her left. 2 trustees sat to her right. Nanakwekwu remained just behind and slightly back, as he always did when things mattered most. The chair of the governance committee, an elderly investor named Mr. Didi, called the session to order. The purpose of today's emergency meeting, he said, voice amplified but dry, is to review concerns regarding executive continuity, fiduciary exposure, and leadership capacity at Adam Global Group. Such tidy words. Such bloodless language. Kwame requested the floor first. Of course he did. He rose with documents in hand and walked to the lectern as if the building already belonged to him. This is a painful day for me, he began. Abena nearly admired the smoothness of the lie. A father never wishes to speak publicly about the struggles of his daughter. But when those struggles endanger shareholders, silence becomes irresponsibility. On the screen behind him appeared a timeline of Abena's accident, her extended medical recovery, several cancelled appearances, recent irregular absences, the marriage, her departure from the Badu estate. Press rumors already beginning to circulate in carefully vague headlines. Kwame let each item breathe. A good manipulator always understood the power of pauses. "We have shown compassion," he continued. "We have protected her privacy. We have supported her through instability. But there comes a moment when love must tell the truth. Abena is not well enough to carry this company." Murmurs. Soft, interested. Never trust a silent room. It is often where betrayal decides whether it can be done cleanly. Kwame lifted another packet. "We have medical concerns. We have evidence of impulsive marital entanglement with an unknown man of no corporate standing. We have concealment of facts from the board. We have emotional decision-making, erratic movement between residences, and compromised judgment." He looked directly at Abena then, not as a father, as a hunter measuring the distance to the throat. "For the good of the company, I move that temporary operational authority be assigned to a stability committee until my daughter can be properly evaluated and protected." Kofi nodded solemnly, overacting already. Akosua lowered her eyes as if the spectacle pained her. Abena sat perfectly still. Inside fury moved cold and precise through her veins. When Kwame returned to his seat, Mr. Didi turned toward the dais. "Chairwoman Owusu, you may respond." Abena pressed the microphone button. The room quieted fully. "My father speaks beautifully," she said. A few brows lifted. "He always has. It is one of the ways he hides damage until the bill arrives for someone else." The sentence landed cleanly. Not shouted, not bitter, sharp enough to cut. She continued, "Yes, I concealed facts. Not because I lacked judgment, because certain people around me had spent years proving they could not be trusted with the truth." She gestured once to Ama. The left screen changed. Documents appeared, corporate transfer logs, consultancy authorizations, maintenance approval chains, side-by-side signature analyses, a private physician access log, shell company payments mapped into Badu-linked entities. The atmosphere changed at once. This was no longer a daughter defending herself. This was an executive beginning an execution. Ama rose and took the lectern. "The evidence will show that while Mr. Kwame Badu claims concern for Madame Owusu's stability, companies under his influence participated in a coordinated effort to restrict her authority, manipulate narratives of incapacity, and divert corporate leverage through concealed channels." Kofi shifted in his chair. Kwame did not move. Too experienced. Too disciplined. Ama clicked again. The screen now showed the Badu textile warehouse maintenance records, beside injury settlements and reimbursement delays. You will also see that supervisors connected to Badu management approved unsafe operating conditions while falsifying compliance paperwork. A voice from the audience cut in. "What does this have to do with executive continuity?" Ama didn't even look flustered. "It goes to character credibility and the pattern of deceit through which this committee has been asked to seize control." Beautiful. Abena almost smiled. Then the side door opened. It was a small sound, but to her it was thunder. Kojo entered the hall wearing his one dark jacket over a clean shirt, damp from hurried movement through morning heat. Beside him walked a thin, nervous lawyer in a modest grey suit, carrying a worn briefcase. Kojo's shoes were polished again. Old, cracked, honorable. For one suspended moment, everything else in the room blurred. Abena forgot the screens, forgot Kofi, forgot even Kwame's face. Kojo had come, not summoned, not escorted by wealth. He had come on his own feet. Ama turned toward the doors, surprised, then understood immediately when the lawyer raised a hand and asked to be recognized as counsel for a material witness. Mr. Didi, sensing history shifting under procedure, allowed it. Kojo crossed the room under 100 staring eyes. Kwame's face changed first, just slightly. But Abena saw it. Fear. Kojo took the witness position. His lawyer introduced submitted materials, copied archive logs, clinic transfer records, worker statements from the textile warehouse, notarized declarations from former staff, and an affidavit linking Kofi's office to unauthorized access requests involving Abena's medical file classification. Kofi actually stood halfway. "This is outrageous. He is nobody. He's her husband for a week, and suddenly we rewrite governance based on street gossip?" Kojo turned his head toward him. Nothing theatrical, nothing loud. And yet the room quieted around him. "I am a man you tried to dismiss because poor people are convenient to ignore," he said. "That was your mistake, not my qualification." Then he faced the committee. "I saw enough at the warehouse to know the lies were not isolated. Workers were being forced to sign false reports. Machines went unrepaired. Records moved through offices tied to this family. I followed the paper because decent people were getting hurt, and because when lies grow expensive enough, someone always starts storing them in files." A ripple of dark amusement moved through parts of the room. Even Mr. Didi looked almost pleased. Kojo's lawyer handed materials to the committee. Amma moved quickly, directing the sequence. The private physician logs were displayed. Dates matched periods when rumors of Abena's incapacity had mysteriously intensified. Storage transfers showed file removals approved through consulting structures linked to Kofi Badu. Payment trails led back to 2 holding accounts tied to Kwame's network. The hall heated with whispers now, not idle curiosity. Shock, realignment. The kind that happens when wealthy certainty begins to rot publicly. Kofi began speaking too fast. "These are fragments. Coincidences. Administrative overlaps." "Stop," Abena said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The word froze him. Then she stood. The room inhaled. It was not a full triumphant rise. She used the dais edge to steady herself. Pain was visible in the slight tremor through her leg. But she stood. Not because spectacle was useful, because truth sometimes needed a body. "For years," she said, looking first at the committee and then directly at her father, "you built a story around me. Fragile, unstable, manageable. You mistook my injury for your opportunity. You mistook my silence for surrender. And you mistook the people you thought were beneath you for people who could not see." She turned slightly toward Kojo. Only slightly. "Enough. The man you dismissed as nothing brought me more truth in 2 days than my own family gave me in years." Kwame rose abruptly. "This is emotional theater." "No," said Mr. Didi before Abena could. "This is evidence." That was the moment the room turned. Everyone felt it. The allied board members who had arrived prepared to support a temporary takeover began reviewing packets with changed faces. One trustee leaned into counsel for hurried whispers. The external auditors requested copies of the transfer records. Akoshwa's perfect stillness cracked at last. Her fingers gripped the edge of her seat. Kofi went pale. Kwame looked around and realized too late that procedure had stopped being his weapon. It was now the blade at his own throat. Mr. Didi spoke again, formal, now final in tone. "Pending immediate forensic review, I move that all authority requests originating from the Badu petition be suspended. I further move that an independent inquiry be opened into unauthorized medical interference, fiduciary misconduct, and safety fraud across related entities." Hands rose, one after another. Not all. Enough. More than enough. The motion passed. Kofi sat down hard, as if his bones had briefly forgotten how to support him. Kwame remained standing, but something enormous had collapsed behind his eyes. Across the hall, Abena lowered herself carefully back into the chair. Victory did not feel loud. It felt like air returning to a room that had been sealed for years. Then her gaze met Kojo's. For a heartbeat, the hall disappeared. No board, no screens, no inheritance. Only the fragile, unfinished space between two people who had now both chosen truth, though it had cost them dearly. The war was not over, but the lie had broken in public. And everyone had heard the sound. The city spoke of the Badu collapse for weeks. Not loudly at first. Power rarely fell with a scream. It cracked in whispers spread through careful headlines, board memos, radio commentary, investor calls, church gossip, lunchroom speculation, and the private satisfaction of workers who had spent years watching elegant cruelty move through expensive offices with polished shoes and legal language. Then the whispers hardened into fact. Regulators opened inquiries. The textile warehouse was inspected. Injury records resurfaced. Frozen accounts triggered panic across Badu-linked shell entities. Kofi disappeared for 3 days before reappearing with a lawyer and a face drained of arrogance. Kwame's allies on the board resigned one by one, each insisting they had been misled. Akosua stopped attending public events altogether after 2 women from an old charity committee quietly withdrew their support. Justice did not arrive as lightning. It came like daylight, steady, unforgiving, and impossible to argue with once everything was visible. Abena watched all of it from a distance, not because she was afraid of the aftermath, because she was tired of building her life around her enemies. Owusu House remained full of movement, lawyers, auditors, trustees, security updates, medical consultations, philanthropy meetings. But for the first time in years, Abena stopped letting crisis define the architecture of every day. She delegated more, interrupted less, chose which battles deserved her pulse. And each morning before the city fully woke, she went downstairs to the rehabilitation studio. At first, the progress was small enough to insult pride. 1 measured stretch, 3 assisted steps. A turn with the parallel bars, 5 minutes on the supported treadmill, then a little more, then more. Some days her body obeyed, some days it revolted. Pain moved through her left hip like buried fire. Her knee shook without warning. Old scar tissue pulled against effort. Twice she nearly fell. Once she did fall hard enough to bruise her elbow and split the skin at her palm. Nana Kweku nearly called the physician. Abena forbade it until she had stood up again. Madame, her physiotherapist said one morning after an especially brutal session, "You are training like a woman, preparing for war." Abena held the parallel bar and breathed through the ache. Maybe I am. The therapist hesitated, against whom Abena looked at her own reflection in the studio glass. For a long moment she did not answer. Then she said, "Against every version of myself that learned to hide instead of live." That was the truest answer she had given anyone in a long time, and yet it was not the only truth moving inside her. Because every night after the files were closed and the house became too quiet, her thoughts returned to Kojo. He did not call. He did not send flowers. He did not accept the expensive car Nana once suggested sending to bring him to the estate for a private conversation. Abena forbade that too. He had chosen his own steps before. If anything between them deserved to survive, it could not be dragged into place by her power. Still, his absence had weight. Not theatrical absence, not punishment, something more difficult. A silence built out of caution, hurt, and dignity. She respected it. That did not make it easier. Meanwhile, Kojo's life had not returned to normal because there was no normal left to return to. The day after the shareholder meeting, 2 things happened. First, the modest lawyer who had stood beside him in the hall sent a message refusing any fee beyond costs. Some cases, he wrote, pay in the restoration of order. Second, 3 different employers declined to hire Kojo after seemingly positive discussions. None gave a reason. One apologized too much. The Badu network was wounded, not dead, That was how powerful families worked. Even in disgrace, they knew how to poison quietly. Kojo should have been angry. He was. But anger was not the whole of it, because inside the frustration of rejected work and whispered pressure campaigns, another reality remained when the hall turned against Kwame. The face Kojo remembered most clearly was not the old man's panic. It was Abena standing with visible pain, refusing to bend. He tried to forget that. He failed. Acey noticed before he admitted it. "You wash the same cup 3 times when you are thinking about her," she said one evening from the doorway of the kitchen. Kojo looked down. He had indeed been rinsing a clean enamel cup with unnecessary concentration. "I am thinking about Rent," he said. Acey snorted. "Then Rent must wear a wedding ring and stare at you in silence." He finally laughed. A real laugh this time. Small, short-lived, but real. Then it disappeared. "She lied to me." Acey leaned against the frame. "Yes, she tested me." "Yes?" "She let me stand in rooms without knowing what game I was standing inside." "Yes?" He set the cup down and turned, and still he said quietly, "When I think of who treated me with more honesty in the end, her or the world around us, the answer embarrasses me." Acey's expression softened. "Then perhaps the question is no longer whether she hid the truth." Kojo held her gaze. "Perhaps the question is what she did after the truth stopped hiding." That stayed with him. It stayed long enough to become decision. 3 weeks after the shareholder meeting, Abena approved the public launch of the Abena Foundation for Mobility and Dignity, a project she had imagined in fragments for years, but never fully claimed. Its purpose was simple and radical at once: rehabilitation support, legal aid, mobility access, and vocational pathways for disabled adults, exploited women, and workers injured by negligent employers. Not pity, infrastructure. Not charity for applause, systems for survival. The launch event was scheduled at a newly renovated community rehabilitation center on land Adam Global had quietly acquired months before. The building was modest by billionaire standards and magnificent by human ones. Sunlit therapy rooms, accessible ramps, training workshops, scholarship offices, a pediatric wing, and an open courtyard planted with young jacaranda trees. Abena chose the place for one reason she did not announce. She wanted healing to have an address. On the morning of the launch, the center hummed with preparation. Staff adjusted microphones. Community leaders arrived in pressed clothes and hopeful caution. Journalists checked batteries. Young mothers guided children through the entrance. Former warehouse workers came too, some invited officially, some simply curious to see whether the powerful ever meant what they said in public. Backstage, Abena stood before a mirror in a soft gold dress and structured cream coat. No wheelchair beside her. It remained nearby, just out of frame if needed. But not beside her. Nanakweku adjusted the edge of her sleeve. His eyes, usually disciplined into discretion, shone briefly. "You do not have to force this today," he said. Abena smiled faintly. "I know." "Then why does it look like you intend to move a mountain?" She looked at herself once more. Because some days a mountain was exactly what one step felt like. Because I am done living only in the safe parts of myself, she answered. Outside, the audience settled. The program began. The speeches moved as such events always did. Local officials' trustee remarks, formal thanks acknowledgements. Abena listened from behind the curtain, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair she was no longer sitting in. Her injured leg trembled already. Sweat dampened the inside of her palm. When her name was called, the room applauded. She did not move immediately. One breath, then another. Then she stepped out. The applause softened not from disappointment, but from shock. Because Abena Owusu was not being wheeled onto the stage. She was walking, not effortlessly, not with miracle-light elegance, slowly, carefully. Each step deliberate. One hand lightly touching a carved wooden cane, more symbolic than necessary for balance, though not meaningless. The tremor in her leg was visible. So was the pain. But so was the choice. The room rose to its feet before she reached the podium. Some cried openly. A former warehouse seamstress pressed both hands to her mouth. One little girl in a leg brace stared up from the front row as if she were seeing the future put on human form. Abena reached the lectern and stood behind it, breathing hard. The applause continued. She let it. Not for ego, for witness. When the room finally quieted, she began. I was taught, she said, voice steady, despite the strain in her body, that weakness should be hidden, managed, or dressed in shame. I was taught that dependence makes you easier to control. I was taught that if pain becomes visible, people will either pity you or use you. A beat. I do not believe that anymore. Silence deepened. She spoke about injury, about dignity, about how systems fail the vulnerable and then blame them for needing help, about workers harmed by greed, about women turned into transactions, about the cruelty of families who mistake possession for care, about the difference between survival and living. Then she said the line that made reporters stop typing and just listen. This center exists because healing should not belong only to the rich, and because no human being should have to perform helplessness to be treated with compassion. The audience broke again, but Abena's eyes had moved past the first rows, to the back, to the open side entrance where a familiar figure stood still in the light. Kojo. He had come in plain dark trousers and a clean white shirt with the sleeves rolled once. No spectacle, no announcement, just presence. He stood near the wall as if uncertain whether he had the right to take up more space. For one terrifying moment Abena lost the next line of her speech, not because she was weak, because hope hit harder than fear ever had. She finished the address somehow. Applause rose again, cameras flashed. Trustees stepped forward. Community leaders moved toward the stage. Abena handed the podium to the next speaker and turned slightly, searching the edge of the crowd. Kojo had not left. When the program shifted into tours and interviews, Nanakweku quietly created space the way only old, loyal men know how. He redirected 2 trustees, delayed a journalist, and said nothing at all when Abena stepped down from the stage and moved toward the courtyard. Kojo met her beneath one of the young jacaranda trees. Up close he looked thinner, tired, honest. For a second neither spoke. The air between them was full of everything unfinished. Abena broke first. You came. Yes. She looked at him carefully. Why he held her gaze. Because staying away stopped feeling like wisdom and started feeling like fear. That nearly undid her. She tightened her hand around the cane instead. I did lie to you, she said. I have no defense for that. No, he replied. You do not. The truth of it hurt. Good, it should, he went on. But I have had weeks to ask myself whether what was real between us died when I learned your name. Abena did not breathe, and his eyes moved to the center behind them, to the children, the braces, the ramps, the therapy rooms, the women registering at legal aid desks, the workers greeting one another without bowing their heads. When people are false, he said quietly, the truth usually makes them smaller. You became larger. Abena looked away before her face could break. He stepped closer. Not enough to crowd, enough to bridge. I was angry, he said. Still am in some places, but anger is not the same as absence. And what I saw in that hall, what I saw today, was not a woman playing games with hearts. It was a woman fighting her way out of cages. Tears burned behind her eyes. She hated crying in daylight. Kojo, he did not let her finish. Instead, in the middle of the courtyard in front of the rehabilitation center she had built out of pain and defiance, he went down on one knee. A hush moved outward from the nearest group like ripples in water. He reached into his pocket, not for a velvet jeweler's box, for the plain ring he had once placed on her finger in a wedding built from humiliation and uncertainty. He looked up at her open-faced and utterly steady. The first time he said, "I married a woman I did not know. The second time I would like to ask the one I do." Abena laughed and broke in the same breath. People nearby had gone quiet now. Some were openly crying. Nana Kweku turned away with suspicious urgency and pretended to inspect Abena. Kojo held out the ring. "No lies," he said. "No tests. No bought witnesses. No cages." Abena let the cane fall gently against the bench behind her. Then, with her leg shaking and her heart beating so hard it made the whole world feel bright, she took 2 careful steps toward him without touching anything. Gasps rose around them. She did not care. A 3rd step. A 4th. And then she was standing before him on her own trembling strength. Tears on her face, the whole of her life dividing behind and ahead of that single moment. "Yes," she whispered. Kojo rose and slid the ring back onto her finger. The courtyard erupted. Applause, laughter, tears, hands to mouths, children clapping because adults were reporters forgetting professionalism, workers cheering as if justice itself had just become visible in human form. Kojo gathered her carefully into his arms. Not to rescue, to receive. And for the first time in many years, Abena did not feel like a woman being managed, tested, pitied, or displayed. She felt chosen. Later people would speak of the foundation, the investigation, the legal victories, the market recovery, the fall of the Badu family, the funding models, the social impact, the reforms. All of that mattered. But the truest ending was simpler. A wounded woman stopped hiding. A poor man refused to sell his soul, and together they built a future where healing was not a private luxury, but a shared inheritance. Some wounds do not begin in the body. They begin in betrayal, in humiliation, in years of being told that your pain makes you less worthy of love, less worthy of power, less worthy of dignity. That is why true healing is never only physical. It is emotional, moral, spiritual. It is the long, painful journey of learning that what was done to you does not define what you deserve. Abena's story reminds us that wealth cannot protect a person from loneliness, and poverty cannot prevent a person from having honor. The world often teaches the opposite. It tells us to trust status, to admire appearances, to mistake polished cruelty for strength, and quiet integrity for weakness. But again and again, life reveals the truth. Character is the only wealth that remains valuable when every mask falls. Kojo did not win because he was rich, powerful, or connected. He won because he stayed honest when dishonesty would have benefited him. Abena did not heal because justice magically erased her pain. She healed because she chose step by step to stop living behind fear and to let truth reshape her life. That is the deeper lesson. Healing is not the absence of scars. It is the courage to walk forward with them. Justice is not revenge. It is the restoration of what should never have been stolen: voice, dignity, freedom, and hope. And sometimes the people who save us are not the ones with the loudest promises. They are the ones who remain kind when kindness costs them something. If this story moved you, tell me where you're watching from and what moment touched you most. And if you love powerful stories about truth, justice, and healing, subscribe and stay with me for the next one.